Astrea is basically Slay the Spire with all the bells and whistles, except it has some interesting features. It's a unique deck building roguelike that flips the script by using dice instead of cards, and adds a unique dual damage system. Now, that may sound complicated, but all it boils down to is dice and a different way of winning. While yes, there are key differences to Slay the Spire, it really isn't that much different when you look at it more closely. The overall gameplay loop, flexible deck design, and powerful relics are still very much similar to Slay the Spire. Before we dive into Astrea, I think it's important to talk about Slay the Spire because it's what has clearly influenced Astrea as a whole. It shows us how far deck builders have come. With its introduction, Slay the Spire has garnered the attention of a massive audience, being one of the most widely renowned indie deck building roguelikes probably ever. Its popularity spread like wildfire, and before you know it, became so popular that they just had to make a board game. Roughly 5 years after development, Slay the Spire became the father of future indie card games, and helped grow roguelikes in general. It proved that you didn't need a big studio to produce another Hearthstone or Artifact.
Oh, brother!
Slay the Spire's simple formula, fast-paced gameplay, and ingenious loop is what kept people staying and playing. And that's a hot commodity these days, probably because we're reaching what I like to call gaming fatigue. Being able to sit down and stay hooked on games is growing more rare these days, simply because we just have way too many options. From Slay the Spire's popularity emerged well-crafted titles like The Griftlands, Balatro, and Across the Obelisk, all of which I recommend checking out. Honestly though, as much as I hate to say it, Slay the Spire isn't perfect. It just happened to be one of the first indie games to strike gold first in its genre, card roguelikes. I'd say that at this point, Slay the Spire has cemented itself with timeless card games such as Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and Old Maid. Whoa! Even now we see much of Slay the Spire's influence on the indie dev scene, and that leads us back to Astrea. So why am I reviewing this game? It's because it's fun, really. For a while at least. If you're still on the fence about purchasing Astrea, or you're trying to find something new to play, then you've come to the right place. So, is Astrea worth the hefty $25 price tag? Let's find out. Like and subscribe. After years of rummaging through what seems to be an infinite plethora of garbage bin games, I think it's safe to say that I can immediately sniff out a diamond in the rough when I see it. In my gaming fatigue haze, I sought out after countless card roguelikes that could sate my hunger, but all I could find was an empty desert.
This is disgusting. This is awful in every way. If I could kill it, I would.
That is until I found an oasis of deck building goodness. Astrea has its fair share of ups and downs, but overall it's pretty easy to get into. The learning curve gradually gets higher as you start off, and eventually you reach a point where the going gets tough, and it can get tough pretty fast. First things first, Astrea introduces you immediately to new mechanics like dice rolling, corruption, and purification, and virtues, as I've said. The most important part of the game and all you realistically care about are your dice. Dice range from safe, balanced, risky, and epic, all of which come with interesting properties. Safe dice have no negative sides but little impact, which I personally rarely make use of. Balanced dice contain few negative sides and moderately impactful sides. Risky dice have heavily impactful positive sides and are usually riddled with negative sides. My main tip is that you should be very particular about what you let into your deck. Risky dice will usually end your run due to bad RNG, but on the flip side they can carry a run if well manipulated. Finally, there are epic dice. Extremely useful dice with no negatives and are potentially run defining. I highly recommend saving as much currency as possible to acquire as many epic dice as you can, since they're way too useful. Instead of the usual health bars, there is a purification and corruption bar. Once your character hits max corruption, the red bar, you lose a life. And similarly, once the enemy reaches max purification, the blue bar, they're defeated. The purification corruption dual damage system is well thought out, acting as a tug of war between defeating enemies. It's the cycle of yin and yang that you as a player need to fully understand before you start actually winning. It should be noted that once you lose your 3 lives, you will be defeated. We'll come back to this point later. Overcorruption is an essential part of this game, and it's important to pay attention to each enemy's overcorruption meter because certain overcorruption meters will outright kill you. What What makes this interesting is you may voluntarily decide to use the corrupted sides of your dice on enemies in order to spare your own health, or sacrifice your health in order to trigger an ability known as a virtue. It's the strategic decision of playing tug of war that makes the system feel fresh and other times exhausting. It often feels like a puzzle game because of how essential sorting your damage wisely is without making a misplay. And believe me, you will be making a lot of misplays before you get the hang of things. This fucking game, man. Let's just say Astrea has quite a few pain points that make an otherwise fun experience turn sideways into a painful nightmare. My favorite mechanic in Astrea, and what gives the game more flair than Slay the Spire, are the virtues available to every oracle. They're basically powerful abilities that can only be triggered from taking a specific amount of corruption. This adds identity to each character and enables the player more control over their fate. A handful of virtues will deal raw damage, others may apply a shield, and some virtues convert corrupted dice sides. Most virtues are always useful and give the player a lot more to digest on turns since you're given extra action economy. Each oracle's virtues make every encounter interesting and are essential in your success. Frequently I treat virtues like get out of jail free cards because rerolling is absolutely crucial in maximizing as much damage as possible while still minimizing your losses. Playing risky around virtues can lead to big payoff moments which help ensure satisfying lethal. That being said, knowing how to efficiently utilize virtues to your advantage purely comes from skill, so don't rely on them entirely. Unlike Slay the Spire, Astrea allows you to recruit sentinels, which are basically pets. Sentinels are always a great addition to have because they'll always support your build one way or another. They're safe bets and can be utilized in a variety of ways like soaking corruption, dishing out damage, or even giving you more dice to roll. Rarely detrimental, I'm fine with their design for the most part because they're always useful. Need a reroll? Need more dice? Need raw damage? Most Sentinels feel very impactful, and it's one of Astrea's highlights. Like Slay the Spire, boons are basically the equivalent of relics. Boons can range from safe to risky, and nothing else in between. Black Hole boons will always have a negative side effect, but grant a useful resource. Character-specific boons are also granted, which are on occasion somewhat useful. You can even sacrifice a life to acquire an extra boon, which is probably the main theme of this game. Risk. My main issue, however, and we'll get to this later in the video, is that boons often feel lackluster. Very few will have the power to carry a run, and numerous boons will have subtle, slight power upgrades for your run. Unfortunately, there's nothing like an ice cream cone, mummy's hand, or frozen eye, so don't expect anything insane or run defining here because that never is the case. Movement in Astrea is relatively simple. There are a variety of nodes that are used to not only forge your deck, but also to advance the game. You have the option of moving to deck nodes, shop nodes, money nodes, or event nodes. Events are oftentimes beneficial to runs, but there are some negative circumstances as well. Sentinel nodes allow for purchasing sentinels just as well as upgrading them. Shops are almost always useful, allowing you to forge, destroy, or duplicate dice as you see fit. This is extremely important because you may want to get rid of unnecessary starter dice, or forge better sides on riskier dice to help ensure your success. Speaking of shops, there are epic shops which provide guaranteed epic dice and boons at a cost. This is especially important in building powerful decks, and I highly recommend investing in epic shops because, more often than not, the game will utterly wreck you with terrible RNG on your dice. So, filling the gaps in your deck with epic dice is a guaranteed safe bet. With all that's been said about the gameplay, Astrea has a way of seamlessly tying its story together like duct tape and dreams. It's a bit basic, but at least it's present. Lore is nearly irrelevant when you're playing a roguelike card game, and at this point it's just a common formality. But nonetheless, I always appreciate a good story, except it's not good. Starting off with Mooney, who's arguably the best character in the game in terms of power and overall balance, she awakens from a deep slumber and decides it's Astrea time.
Oh, bro.
Mooney then begins her domino effect of awakening the other oracles in order to slay the heart of corruption, or in this case, Astrea. If it wasn't clear already, Astrea is based off of constellations involving astrological signs which give hopeless romantics something to think about while they play. After beating the game a total of 6 times, you can finally open the gate where Astrea's heart lies. Just like unlocking the Heart's Chamber in Slay the Spire, I won't spoil anything as to the ending of Astrea, but everything ties together as well as one would expect, minus the random Triceratops Oracle. Astrea gives you the option of facing easy or hard mini-boss fights, and on top of that, there is there's an Ascension difficulty if you beat the game as a character. There's even a separate hard Ascension every time you defeat Astrea. I won't divulge as to what Ascension entails in Astrea, but it's something to add more replayability for players who simply hate themselves. I won't judge. Overall, the addition of any exposition is welcome because at first, everything feels random and overwhelming. Giving purpose, meaning, and weight to you as a player is a good feeling to have. If the shoe fits, of course. I just wanted to point out that this is why story is important to any game worth its salt. I appreciate it when games give purpose to its design, and some lore goes a long way in tying things together. It just makes sense to coalesce the overall theme of your game in a way that makes sense. You know a game that literally made no sense when it didn't have any story or lore backing it up? Old League of Legends. I'll give credit where credit is due and say that the sound, art, and music are fantastic. Every animation is smooth and big hits are satisfying to watch. Events have impact thanks to the soundtrack accompanying them and feel otherworldly thematically. You actually believe you're a cosmic entity from the grandiose music. Each character looks interesting and the symbols are cute as well. The enemies are also intricately designed. All the themes for boss fights minus Astrea are okay and could be a bit more interesting. Astrea's boss fight, however, is riveting and exciting to play against given her theme. Overall, the entirety of Astrea from an artistic standpoint is well envisioned to the point of perfection. The shame the slow-paced nature of the game couldn't catch up. Now, as much as I enjoy talking about Astrea's good aspects, we should talk about what I didn't like. Astrea can be summed up in one word: slow. Simply put, it's because the developers are allergic to power scaling in the grand scheme of things. I'm not saying that power isn't present at all, I'm just saying that what you're given to help scale is a bit too slow for my liking. Unlike the vast powerful cards and relics you can obtain in Slay the Spire, I feel that the relics and risky dice are holding back on much needed power. Some runs you'll feel like your build is practically non-existent to the point of abandoning the run entirely. Other runs you'll finally get something off the ground only to inevitably crash against the faster scaling bosses. In general, this circulates a power vacuum within Astrea that doesn't enable your builds, but only enhances what's there by a depressingly measly margin. So if your deck isn't godly by the end of the game, you're practically screwed. Not to mention that bosses scale considerably faster than your character. Boons are a huge problem because they don't give you something to look forward to, and every time you see a new common boon, you just throw it in the trash. Black hole relics are good, but can always be better. I feel like there should be more payoff in boss relics and more imagination in the relics in general. Some builds only come online from specific relics and it's too particular and rare. The game is poorly reflected upon the boons available to you. Even when you unlock all the boons, most of them aren't particularly interesting to the point where I genuinely want to cry. I will say though that the slower pace did help soak in all the details more, since the artistic design is impeccable. Another issue is the lack of UI giving you enough information to make decisive turns. What I mean by that is the total amount of corruption your character will take isn't completely calculated by the game. I mean, it technically is, but it isn't shown. This leads to decision paralysis because you literally don't know when you're going to die. Add boons with side effects, dots, and extra corruption damage, and you have yourself the most frustrating mathematical PB&J sandwich made. Astrea for the most part demands that you calculate all the damage you're about to take yourself, and likewise whatever damage you deal. It's a big gripe of mine because I've lost many a run due to this severe lack of information. Sometimes you don't account for one extra point of damage and boom.
I should have just immediately focused.
There goes an hour of progress. If you've watched anything on my channel, you'll know that I'm a big advocate for fun gameplay. You just can't sugarcoat trash. I might be a bit harsh on my critique here, but I think the execution on a couple of characters is poorly done. Don't get me started on Astrea. Astrea has heart, but lacks a much needed meaningful punch. After playing countless hours, Astrea loses its luster after a while. Gradually, the continuing disappointment of acquiring awful boring relics accompanied by a less than stellar slow power scaling degrades the enjoyment. This is because there is a severe lack of payoff in varying builds, and some oracles just feel unfun to play. I honestly wish there was better scaling and excitement when it came to Astrea's relics, but it just feels like that's where the least amount of focus was put. Granted, there are 6 characters to play. It doesn't matter when it's potentially potential is greatly diminished by the lack of power gains available. There's also the lack of information given, so you don't know when you're going to take lethal corruption. Regardless of my gripes and qualms with the game, Astrea is still unique, and I have yet to find any other dice deck builder that feels just as satisfying, with the exception of Dicey Dungeons. It was a nice enough distraction from real games, if only momentary. In conclusion, I think Astrea does some things right, but it definitely takes some getting used to due to its slow pacing and albeit boring relics. If you're looking for a game to relieve that card roguelike itch, I think Astrea does just that if you have the patience. Mixed with an interesting RNG dice system and a clever health mechanic, it'll give you enough to chew on for hours on end. My guarantee is you'll get decent mileage from Astrea, maybe some odd 20 hours before you decide to play something else. I think if you suck, or have the attention span of a goat, then this title is definitely not in your ballpark. In short, the TLDR of Astrea is that it's okay at best. I enjoyed my time with it for the most part, and it's obvious to see Slay the Spire's influence. It has its fair share of ups and downs, but it's an example of what people can do with transforming a great title into something new and vibrant. A wise guy once said, "There is nothing new under the sun," and Astrea is certainly no different to that fact. If you know me, I'm always on the hunt for great new indie titles to seek out. I feel like AAA studios are getting a run for their money these days, and there will always be an ample amount of competition on the horizon. More or less, Astrea is a decent purchase to fill the boredom on the weekends, but nothing more than a moderately satisfying venture. I hope from this video, you'll be able to make well-educated decisions on future card roguelikes, and even indie games in general. The indie game market is saturated with, I'll say, less than desirable and underdeveloped titles, most of which need Jesus. Stop it! But occasionally, you do strike gold. Feel free to recommend what you want me to review or play next in the comments. As always, like the video if you want to see more from me. It helps me greatly. And subscribe to keep yourself updated. Go play Balatro, you dummy.